Look at your calendar, meetings, deadlines, notifications, reminders, a day that already belongs to someone else before it even begins. Most of us feel this every week. We say we do not have enough time, but the deeper question is stranger. When did time become something you could sell? When did an hour of life become a unit on a payroll sheet? When did being late by 5 minutes become a failure? This video is not a story about work ethic. It is not simply about people learning to work harder. It is a story about a labor system, a system that took human time and made it measurable, recordable, punishable, sellable. In that system, the clock became more than a tool. It became a manager. A wage became more than payment. It became a price placed on a piece of life. Slowly, people learned to feel time as money. Before factories ruled the workday, many people did not experience time the way we do now. They still worked hard, very hard. A farmer could be exhausted by harvest. A fisher had to follow tides. A household had to prepare food, repair tools, gather fuel, and care for animals. But much work was organized around tasks. You worked until the bread was baked, until the hay was gathered, until the cloth was finished, until the animal was fed. Time followed the job, not the other way around. This does not mean life was easy. It does not mean people were lazy. It means work and life were often mixed together. A person could work, talk, rest, eat, help a neighbor, and return to the task. The sun mattered, the season mattered, the weather mattered, the body mattered. The clock was not yet the ruler of every minute in that older world. Time was lived through tasks, not sliced into sellable units. One old custom shows this clearly. Saint Monday, in parts of pre-industrial Europe, artisans and workers sometimes took Monday off after being paid on Saturday. They drank, they socialized, they delayed the return to work, then they might work longer later in the week. To an employer, this looked disorderly. But to workers, it was a way of keeping some control over their own rhythm. Still, we must be careful. Pre-industrial people were not free from discipline. A storm could force a farmer to rush. A winter could punish laziness. A harvest could demand long days. Nature was strict. Hunger was strict. Local custom was strict. But industrial capitalism introduced a different kind of discipline. The factory needed everyone together, at the same time, in the same place, following the same machine. A steam engine could not wait for Saint Monday. A power loom could not adapt to each worker's mood. The factory needed regular time, and once the factory arrived, the clock came with it. Inside the factory, the clock became a new master. The bell told people when the day began. Not sunrise, not hunger, not the task. The bell, a worker could arrive tired, cold, or sick. It did not matter. The time had been set. A clerk wrote arrival times into a ledger. A supervisor watched the gate. A factory clock hung above the room. Minutes became visible. They could be counted. They could be compared. They could be used against you. This was a deep change. Imagine a child playing at home. Now imagine that same child later becoming a worker. Their day no longer begins when the household wakes. It begins when the factory commands. The bell divides life. Before the bell, you are private. After the bell, your time belongs to work. That line seems normal to us now, but historically it had to be built. Factories needed synchronization. That means many people had to move together, like gears in one machine. One worker could not start late if another worker depended on their task. One machine could not sit idle if coal, cotton, tools, and wages had already been paid for. The machine set the rhythm. The worker followed. This is why factory time was different from task time. In task time, the job ends when the task is done. In factory time, the worker remains until the clock releases them, and the days could be brutal. Industrial work often demanded 12 to 16 hours, sometimes 6 days a week. Women worked, men worked, children worked. The factory did not simply organize labor. It stretched the day. Morning became machine time. Afternoon became machine time. Evening could still be machine time. The worker did not just give effort. The worker surrendered hours. Once wages were paid by the hour, time changed, meaning a worker was not only selling skill, not only strength, not only attention. The worker was selling measured life. 1 hour, 2 hours, 10 hours. A wage ledger could turn a week into numbers. Arrived late, worked 6 days, lost pay, fined for absence, fined for talking, fined for leaving the machine. In this new logic, wasted time looked like stolen money. If a machine stopped, the owner saw lost output. If a worker paused, the owner saw lost capital. This is why factories created rules, not a few rules. Huge numbers of rules. Some work sites used detailed rule books to control movement, speech, lateness, smoking, singing, and idleness. The rule book turned discipline into paper. The bell turned it into sound. The clock turned it into measurement. The wage turned it into money. Together they made time into a system. A good way to understand this is to imagine two different kinds of loss. In an older task-based world, if a worker paused for a few minutes, the task was delayed, but in a factory, the pause could spread. One worker stopped, one machine slowed, the next worker waited, the raw material sat still. The owner saw not just a pause, but a chain of lost minutes. That is why time became so intensely controlled. The factory was not only buying labor, it was buying rhythm, it was buying predictability, it was buying the promise that everybody would be in the right place when the machine needed it. The factory also needed watchers. A clock on the wall was not enough. Someone had to record it, someone had to enforce it, someone had to say who was late, who left early, who stopped working, who wasted minutes. At some factories, monitors or clerks logged workers' time with close attention. Arrival, departure, breaks, absence. The worker's day became a document. Then came clocking in. A worker did not simply enter the workplace. The worker had to be recorded, a card, a token, a mark in a book. Later, punch clocks would make this even more mechanical. The message was simple. If your time is not recorded, it may not count. If your time is recorded badly, you may not be paid. A few minutes could become a fine. A locked gate could cost a day's wages. That is how the clock became an economic weapon. Some employers went even further. The research around early industrial discipline includes examples like the Crowley Iron Works, where rules stretched into an enormous written code. Workers could be watched, corrected, fined, and recorded. The workplace became almost like a small state. There were rules for movement, rules for speech, rules for lateness, rules for idleness, and there were people assigned to observe. This matters because the factory did not only need strong machines, it needed obedient time. It needed workers who could be made regular enough for capital to plan around them. Picture payday. A worker stands at a desk. A clerk opens the ledger. There are names, hours, deductions, late marks, fines, coins accounted. But the worker is not only receiving money, the worker is seeing how the week has been judged. This is the power of the wage ledger. It turns lived time into a calculation. A cold morning becomes a late mark. A short pause becomes a deduction. Conversation becomes lost output. A few minutes become missing food money. The phrase time theft comes from this logic. From the employer's side, any moment not working could look like money being taken, but from the worker's side, something else was happening. Their life was being measured from outside. Their pauses, their fatigue, their small acts of freedom, all could be turned into entries in a book. The ledger did not only count time, it changed what time meant. Why did employers care so much? Because machines were expensive. A steam engine cost money. A loom cost money. Coal cost money, raw cotton cost money, buildings cost money. If the machine stood still, capital stood still, so human labor had to be synchronized with the machine. Hands moved with gears, bodies moved with belts. Attention followed the line. The worker became part of a larger rhythm. Then came productivity measurement, not just how much was made, but how much was made per hour, how much yarn, how much cloth, how many pieces, how many mistakes. The question changed. It was no longer only, is the work done? It became, how much output did this hour produce? That is the heart of industrial time. An hour became a container that had to be filled with measurable output. The empty hour became waste. The full hour became profit. Factory wages could be attractive. Some workers earned more in factories than they might have earned in older domestic work. But the wage came with a bargain. You give us your time, we give you money. You enter when the bell rings. You leave when the clock allows. You work at the pace of the machine. This was the time bargain. It bought not only labor, it bought the day. A family could lose the morning before breakfast was even finished. A child might see a parent leave before sunrise. A worker might return after dark. The day had been purchased somewhere else. This is the central transformation. Industrial capitalism did not only use labor, it changed the unit of labor. It turned human time into the sellable hour, a watch, a glove, a wage coin, a time card. Together, they tell one story. Life was being divided into units that could be bought. This is why the sellable hour is such a powerful invention. It looks simple, 1 hour of work, 1 hour of pay. But hidden inside that exchange is a deeper transfer. The worker gives up control over the shape of the day. The employer does not need to own the worker forever, only from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, only during the shift, only while the clock is running. That is what made wage labor different from older forms of dependence. It could appear free, but inside the working day, control was extremely tight. Rules can control a workplace, but rules alone are never enough. A worker can be watched at the gate, but what happens at home? A supervisor can punish lateness, but what makes a person feel guilty for resting? This is where Max Weber helps explain another layer. Weber argued that modern capitalism needed disciplined people. Not just machines, not just markets, people who treated work as a duty, people who saw time as something that must not be wasted, people who could control desire, delay pleasure and keep working even without a boss in the room. He connected this to the Protestant idea of a calling. Work was not only survival. It became a moral task. A person's ordinary job could feel like a duty before God. That idea did not create capitalism by itself. Weber's thesis is debated, but it helps explain something important. The clock outside the worker became a clock inside the worker. Weber's argument was not simply that Protestants worked hard. It was more specific. He described inner worldly asceticism. That means discipline inside ordinary life, not a monk leaving the world, but a merchant, craft worker, or entrepreneur living inside the world with strict self-control. Avoid luxury, avoid idle pleasure, avoid wasting time, work carefully, save, reinvest, keep accounts. In this moral world, wealth was dangerous if it led to comfort and laziness, but wealth could be acceptable if it was earned through discipline and put back into productive work. A coin spent on luxury could be suspect. A coin reinvested in tools could seem virtuous. Time also became moral. Wasting time was not only inefficient, it could feel sinful. Rest became suspicious. Pleasure became a temptation. The person began supervising themselves, not only with fear of the employer, but with guilt. Benjamin Franklin gave this discipline a more secular form. Time is money, a short phrase, but it contains an entire world. Do not waste the hour. The hour could earn, the hour could compound, the hour could become capital. Over time, the religious language faded, but the habits remained. Punctuality, efficiency, planning, self-control, early rising, keeping accounts, using time rationally. Weber called the result an iron cage. The image is powerful. The early believer may have chosen disciplined work as a calling, but modern people are often forced into it by the system. Rent is due. Bills arrive. Jobs demand punctuality. Markets reward efficiency. Schools train routines. Companies measure output. The cage remains even when the old religious meaning disappears. The church may fade from the story, but the calendar stays. The alarm stays. The deadline stays. The habit stays. Weber's thesis has serious limits. Capitalism also grew in Catholic places. Commercial capitalism existed in Italian cities before the Reformation. Modern capitalism has flourished in East Asian societies shaped by non-Protestant traditions. Some historians argue Protestant success had more to do with literacy and education than a special work ethic, so we should be careful. This is not a story where one religion explains everything. The stronger point is wider. Modern capitalism needed disciplined people, and discipline could come from many places: religion, schools, factories, wages, cities, poverty, ambition, management. Children learned punctuality in classrooms. The school bell resembled the factory bell. Rows of students learned to sit, wait, answer, and arrive on time. The habit of industry began early. A child who learned the clock at school could later obey it at work. Time discipline became culture, not only a factory rule. This is also why Weber and Thompson fit together. Thompson helps explain the outside pressure. The bell, the gate, the ledger, the fine. Weber helps explain the inside pressure. The guilt, the calling, the fear of wasted time, the desire to be useful. One system trained the body, the other trained the conscience. Modern capitalism worked best when both met. The worker arrived on time because the gate would close, but also because lateness began to feel like personal failure. A schedule can be useful. It helps organize life, but in modern work culture, the schedule can become moral. Every empty hour asks a question. Why are you not working? Why are you not improving? Why are you not producing? This is how self-supervision works. The boss does not always need to stand behind you. You carry the boss inside. You check the clock. You feel guilty for resting. You answer a message after hours. You look at tomorrow's calendar before sleeping. The day begins to feel like debt. You owe time to work. You owe time to bills. You owe time to improvement. You owe time to the future. This is why modern people can feel tired even when no one is shouting at them. The old factory bell has become quieter, but it still rings inside the mind. Modern society praises the useful person, the person who arrives early, plans carefully, works efficiently, wastes nothing, keeps moving. This can create real benefits. Factories run, trains arrive, hospitals coordinate shifts, schools open, cities function, but there is a cost. When productivity becomes virtue, rest becomes suspicious. A tired person can look lazy. A person without visible output can seem worthless. A pause can look like failure. This is one of the deepest changes in modern work. Time is no longer just something we live through. It becomes a measure of character. Are you disciplined? Are you productive? Are you serious? Are you falling behind? The old moral language may be gone, but the judgment remains. The useful person is praised. The idle person is watched. And everyone learns to measure themselves. By this point, the cage has expanded. It is no longer only in the factory. It is in the school, the home, the train timetable, the office, the planner, the city, but workers did not simply accept this. E.P. Thompson emphasized resistance. The working class fought the new time discipline. They clung to older habits. They protected St. Monday. They arrived late. They slowed down. They challenged unfair clocks. They fought fines. This matters because time discipline was not natural. It had to be imposed. It had to be taught. It had to be punished into place. A factory gate was not just an entrance, it was a border outside the gate. People still had customs, bodies, families, habits, and older rhythms. Inside the gate, the clock ruled. The conflict between those two worlds shaped modern labor history. At first, workers often fought against time discipline itself. A Monday in the tavern, a late arrival. A slow return after lunch. A refusal to move exactly with the bell. These were not always organized protests. Sometimes they were everyday acts of resistance. But employers answered with penalties. Locked gates, lost wages, fines, warnings, deducted coins. A worker 5 minutes late could lose far more than 5 minutes of pay. That is how discipline works. It multiplies the punishment. A small act becomes expensive. A human delay becomes a financial loss. The worker learns quickly. The clock is not neutral. The clock belongs to the system that pays you, and if the clock belongs to the employer, then even minutes can become unequal. One person owns the machine, the other sells the hour. Long hours left marks on bodies, tired hands, bent backs, children working too long, women and men leaving factories after dark. The cost of time discipline was not only emotional, it was physical. Over time, worker resistance changed. Once workers learned that time was money, they began to fight about time, not only against the clock. About the clock. How long should the day be? How much is overtime worth? Who controls breaks? What is a fair week? The 10-hour movement made this visible. Workers and reformers argued that the workday needed limits. This was a major historical shift. The clock that had been used to discipline workers became a tool workers used to make claims. If you buy my hours, then my hours have value. If you take more of them, you must pay. If the day is too long, it must be shortened. This was a major change in worker consciousness. Earlier, workers might resist by ignoring the clock. Later, they used the clock as evidence. If the employer counted minutes, workers could count them too. If the employer said time was money, workers could answer, then our time has a price. This is how the struggle changed. The clock was still a tool of discipline, but it also became a tool for bargaining. The same measurement that controlled workers could be used to demand limits. Overtime is a powerful idea. It accepts the wage system, but it changes the terms. The worker says, "This is not ordinary time. This is extra time, and extra time has a higher price." Time and a half follows the same logic. Once time becomes money, workers can demand a better exchange rate. This is how resistance moved inside the system. Workers did not fully escape clock time, but they fought to make clock time less one-sided, shorter days, better pay, limits on child labor, weekends. These were not gifts, they were won through conflict, organization, pressure, and law. The weekend feels natural now, but it is historical. It is a social victory, a piece of life pulled back from the market. The factory clock still exists. But for a moment, the street belongs to people again. The factory clock did not disappear, it changed shape. Today, it may look like a phone, a calendar app, a time tracker, a billing system, a project dashboard, a productivity tool. In an office, the day appears as blocks, 30 minutes, 1 hour, a meeting, a deadline, a call, a task. Before the day begins, the calendar has already claimed it. In some professions, time becomes even more directly priced. Billable hours turn thought into invoice lines, reading time, writing time, email time, meeting time. A person sits at a desk late at night, entering small slices of life into a billing system. This is not the same as a 19th century factory. But the pattern echoes. Time is recorded, time is valued, time is sold. The clock survives by becoming digital. Modern work often measures output through numbers, KPIs, performance targets, response time, tickets closed, calls completed, words typed, screens watched. A dashboard can make work visible, but it can also make the worker feel reduced to metrics. Remote work adds another layer. Home becomes workplace. The kitchen table becomes a desk. The laptop becomes a gate. The webcam light becomes a kind of clock. Some monitoring software can track keystrokes, screenshots, websites, mouse movement, and idle time. People call this bossware. The supervisor becomes software. There may be no foreman standing in the room, but the worker still feels watched. This is the modern version of an older question. Who controls the worker's time? The answer is no longer only the factory owner. It can be the platform, the dashboard, the algorithm, the monitoring system. This is why modern digital work can feel strangely familiar. The screen is not a factory gate. The keyboard is not a steam engine. But the question is similar. Are you active? Are you idle? How long did the task take? How many units did you finish? How quickly did you respond? A 19th century clerk wrote minutes in a ledger. A modern platform stores them in a database. The technology changed. The desire to capture time did not disappear. Platform labor makes this even clearer. A delivery worker opens an app, a task appears, a route appears, a timer appears. Accept, decline, deliver, wait. The worker may seem independent, but the rhythm is shaped by the platform. The app assigns, the map directs, the rating pressures, the algorithm adjusts the pace. This is not the old factory. There may be no fixed factory gate, but there is still discipline, digital discipline. The same logic can move into AI monitoring, not just hours, attention, emotion, posture, tone, productivity. Even focus can become data. We should be cautious here. Modern work is not identical to early industrial labor today. There are legal protections, weekends, and rights that many early factory workers did not have. But the underlying pattern is visible. The system keeps trying to measure more of the human being. Quiet quitting is often described as laziness, but it can also be read as a small struggle over time. A worker closes the laptop when the day ends, stops answering messages at midnight, does the job, but refuses to donate the whole self. This echoes an older conflict. Who owns the hour after work? Who owns the weekend? Who owns attention? Still, we must not flatten history. A remote worker with labor rights is not the same as a child in a 19th century mill. A modern office is not the same as a steam-powered factory. But comparison can reveal continuity without erasing difference. Free time had to be won. Shorter hours had to be fought for. Weekends had to be made. The fact that we can close the laptop at all is part of that history. Every protected hour carries a struggle behind it. The system persists because measurement keeps expanding. The old punch clock becomes the phone app. The factory ledger becomes the dashboard. The supervisor becomes software. The time card becomes a data trail. And the old question remains: is time for life, or is life for work? This video is not arguing that all schedules are bad. Schedules can help, clocks can coordinate, wages can protect. A measured hour can become a fair claim. But when every hour must justify itself economically, something human is lost. A meal, a walk, a child's drawing, a quiet evening, a body needing rest, a mind needing silence. Maybe that is why time feels expensive today, not because the day has fewer hours than before, but because so many of those hours arrive already named work time, billable time, commute time, meeting time, response time, screen time, productive time. Even free time can become something to optimize. A walk becomes step count, a hobby becomes content, a rest becomes recovery for more work. The system does not always take time by force. Sometimes it teaches us to measure it ourselves. The invisible pattern is this: modern capitalism did not only organize work, it reorganized time. It taught people to sell hours, fear lateness, measure output, feel guilty for rest, and call all of this normal. The question now is not whether time is money. The question is whether it has to be only money.